Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary, joining us now. Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Before we go on to anything else, how can a 12-year-old buy a machete and with his 12-year-old mate massacre a young man on the streets of Britain in the 21st century?
I can barely find the words of this absolutely heinous crime. One of the things that I've really, frustrated is not the right word, it's not a strong enough word. One of the things I've been infuriated by is to think about some of the tragedies that have occurred in my own constituency in the last 9 years. Sword attacks, a pregnant woman killed with a crossbow. It is far too easy to buy these weapons. We need to clamp down on sales. We do also need to make sure that we take a tough line when it comes to policing and then enforcement with really tough penalties for offenders. We've put forward those proposals in opposition. We will take them forward if we win the next general election. But you just look at the horror of this crime and the age of the perpetrators. Something's gone really badly wrong with our society. And I think we need a return to the approach of tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And that's the approach that Labour's setting out in our manifesto later this week, that Yvette Cooper, our Shadow Home Secretary, has been talking about in recent days. Because, when something like this happens, and I think what's changed actually in our country in recent years, there's a danger that these sorts of things become normalised, that we become desensitised, and you pick up the newspaper or turn on the TV and there's yet another horrific crime involving young people. We must never allow this to become normalised. We must never lessen our outrage, but we do need that tough on crime and tough on the cause of crime approach to reducing violent crime and keeping young people safe.
How can we trust Labour on this, though, when knife crime in London has risen year on year under a Labour mayor?
Well, there have been challenges in violent crime right across the country. We know that there are challenges in big cities, but we also know that when it comes to policing and the criminal justice system, that we will have a responsibility, if we are in government, to make sure that we provide mayors right across the country and communities across the country with the levels of policing they need. Our commitment to rebuild neighbourhood policing with 13,000 more police officers, that's crucial for intelligence-led policing, for building relationships with communities, to know where the drug dealers are, where the drug dealing's happening, to know with and from young people who's carrying knives on our high streets and in our communities, how young people are feeling going to and from school or to and from the places they like to socialise. That intelligence-led approach is crucial. You also need a criminal justice system that works, and to make sure that you've got the prison places so that we're not releasing violent offenders early, as we've seen happening in recent months, that we're not telling courts to hold off on processing and sending criminals to prison, as we've seen in recent months under the Conservatives. So I don't pretend that these are easy challenges to solve. And this is one of a whole number of really difficult, serious challenges we will face if we win the general election. But we've got a strong programme to implement on this if we are given the chance. And that's about policing, it's about strong and tough justice, and it's also about the deterrence, the diverting young people from crime. And one of the policies I'm actually most excited about are our Young Futures hubs, which is a sort of, programme for teenagers, which will bring together a range of services.
OK, I'll come to that. But I go back to my point, which is that knife crime has increased 20% year on year under a Labour mayor. So how can we trust Labour to tackle knife crime if you become the next government?
Well, because we have to give our mayors the tools to do the job. And this is a challenge right across the country, in big cities, in urban areas.
In other cities, it's
cuts
London.
Cuts to policing haven't helped. The state of our justice system hasn't helped. The cuts to youth services haven't helped. And that's why I think Labour's approach will be far more effective than we've seen under the Conservatives. And I urge people to give change a chance when they go to vote on July the 4th. Look, we've got to take a tougher approach, but that means also giving the police the tools to do the job, whether that's more police officers and rebuilding neighbourhood policing as we've committed to, making sure that the penalties, the criminal justice is there, and also to make sure that the prevention work is there too. I think all of those ingredients are absolutely essential, as is stop and search, which is a crucial tool in the fight against crime. And I know it's not uncontroversial, but believe me, I'd much rather have an uncomfortable conversation with someone that was stopped, unfortunately, than have a conversation with a grieving family about why their son's been stabbed to death on the streets.
And we could continue on with that point, but we've got much to get through, including the current crisis in children's dentistry.
Yes, that's right. And NHS dentistry is in a real state right across the country. We've got to rebuild NHS dentistry, and while we do that, Labour's first step will be to deliver 700,000 extra emergency dentistry appointments, 100,000 of which will be allocated specifically for children, so they get that access to the emergency dental care that they need. That's a £1 billion commitment that will be funded by closing the tax loopholes on tax avoidance, non-dom tax status too, and that will make a real difference to tackling our dentistry crisis. And Kate, sorry, I think I just said £1 billion. Actually, it's 100 million. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it depends whether you're going with American numbers or not as to whether it's $1 billion, isn't it? I get that. How are you actually going to pay for it, though? Just remind me where that money is actually going to come from.
So there's two components to the £1.6 billion package on NHS waiting overall. That's partly by clamping down on tax avoidance. So there is a significant tax gap in this country of the taxes that are owed to HMRC but aren't paid. We're going to clamp down on that, giving HMRC some additional resources to do that job, and that will generate the income that we need to fund our NHS pledge as well as others, and also closing down the remaining loopholes for non-dom tax status. Because despite all of the toing and froing we've had with the Conservatives on that front, it is still the case that there are loopholes there, so we will close them off. We think those are fairer choices, and when people see Labour's manifesto on Thursday, you will see where the money's come from and where the money's being spent. And I think that will be a combination of fairer choices on how we raise the money and wiser choices on where we spend the money. And at the heart of that is a commitment not to increase taxes on working people. So we've ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and VAT, because we know that working people are really feeling the pinch at the moment. They're being really clobbered by the Conservatives. And we don't think that that's right or fair.
Capital gains tax?
Nothing in Labour's manifesto requires changes to capital gains tax, increases in capital gains tax. Nothing in Labour's manifesto. I think on this, Kay, Rachel Reeves has made very clear we've got the highest tax burden in 70 years. What we are trying to do, and what we will do if we win the general election, is try and lower the burden of taxation on people. So we're not looking to clobber people with higher tax rises, because we just know people can't afford it right now. That does mean tough choices and honest choices. So today we're going to have a big splurge of spending and tax cuts from Rishi Sunak when the money isn't there. What you'll get on Thursday from Labour. What we'll get on Thursday from Labour is a manifesto where the promises we make are promises we can keep and promises that you and your viewers can afford. And I think that's a much more responsible and fairer approach.
Council tax?
Well, on council tax, that has risen year after year under the Conservatives, because they keep on passing on and devolving cuts and blame to local councils, forcing council tax up, leaving people saying, well, why am I paying more and getting less?
The Tories talking about you. What are you guys going to do?
Well, the central challenge, Kay, and the reason why we've got the highest burden of taxation in 70 years and the approach Labour will take to get that burden down, we've got to get growth back into the economy. Why do we have a high tax economy? Because we have a low growth economy. And if the economy had grown...
Mr Streeting.
If we had grown, the economy had grown under this government at the rate it had grown under the last Labour government, there'd be over £30 billion available to either invest in our public services or to return to people through tax cuts, without having to hike up taxes for someone somewhere else. And that's the consequence of 14 years of low growth.
What you're
and so
do, and it
when
sounds to me as though we're going to get clobbered on our council tax.
No, we don't want to see people clobbered on council tax. What I will say on that and every other promise we make, the promises we make are promises we can keep and the country can afford. It will be a fully costed, fully funded manifesto with promises we can keep and you can afford. And that is why. Well, House, and there's a serious point here, though, Kay, which is that we have, for weeks and months now, in fact years, and including when I've been on your programme and people have said, well, will you spend money in X area or will you cut taxes in Y area? And often we've had to say no to things that we'd probably quite like to do, but at this stage, unless we can say that the promise can be kept and the country can afford that promise, we're not going to make those promises. And that's why I'll be able to come on your programme and others in the coming weeks after Labour's manifesto and look your viewers in the eye and say the promises we make are promises we can keep and promises that you can afford. Rishi Sunak cannot say that. He won't be able to say that after today. And if he does, he's lying to you.
OK, well, they said about you guys as well, so let's wait and see, should we? We're sort of in an election run-up, so lots of strong words either side, but let's see what happens come the 5th of July. It's good to see you as always. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Take care.